Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Growing Pains. How does growth affect my community's bottom line? With Colin McAweeney of Tischler Weiss. I'm Amy Luft, the Communication Coordinator at Compass. Compass strives to reach out to all the residents of Ada and Canyon counties. Please help us track how we are doing by participating in the poll on your screen. Your responses are anonymous and participation is completely voluntary, but we appreciate your help. The growth in the Treasure Valley has been tremendous, and it is indisputable, but opinions abound as to whether it's good or bad. Ultimately, the answer is almost always it depends. It depends on where the growth occurs, what type of growth is happening, who is impacted, and more. Today, economic analyst Colin McAweeney will discuss the new fiscal impact tool that he has developed for Compass to help tackle that issue in the Treasure Valley. Colin will demonstrate how the tool can be used to better understand and anticipate how different types of growth in different areas of the valley can affect the fiscal health of the community and its ability to provide services to its residents. Colin is a senior fiscal and economic analyst at Tischler Weiss. He specializes in finance and economic development planning and is an industry expert at the intersection of land use planning and municipal finance. Colin has completed fiscal impact and user fee studies in more than 30 communities. Prior to joining Tischler Weiss, Colin completed his thesis surrounding urban aspects that attract investment and has worked in the finance sector for several years. A few housekeeping items before we start. First, for good sound quality, all participants have been muted. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box. Mr. McAweeney will pause to answer questions about halfway through the presentation and then again at the end of his remarks. This presentation is being recorded and will be available later on Compass's YouTube channel. Watch for emails on the Compass website and information on future presentations via email. And please remember to complete the poll on your screen. Thank you. Colin, I will now turn the screen over to you.
Thanks, Amy. And I might have already ran into a technical issue. I think I actually paused the polling, but it looks like it might be kicking off right now. So apologize for any confusion there. Let me share my screen now. And good morning, everyone. Thanks, Amy and Compass, allowing Tischler Weiss and myself to present, fiscal impact analysis in the fiscal impact tool that we created for Compass. I'm Colin McAweeney. I'm the head of the Boise office of Tischler Weiss. We also have a our main office in Bethesda, Maryland. So here we go. So we're going to break this presentation into two parts, separated by a Q&A, as Amy sort of mentioned. I also am not going to be able to see your comments or questions sort of during the presentation, but feel free to include those in the chat box. Everyone's muted and can't see your screen, so probably the best for my best audience for my poorly worded jokes. But during this presentation, the first half is going to be about fiscal impact analysis, what those studies look like, what they are and what they aren't, and how can that help in making planning decisions generally, but then also in the Treasure Valley in Idaho. The second half of the presentation will be specific to the fiscal impact tool that we created for Compass. We're going to do a general overview of it, but then go into the building blocks, the workflow, results, example results of the tool, and how it's going to be used. And then at the end, we'll also have time to answer any questions and discuss the fiscal impact tool. So Tischler Buys, a little bit about us. We're a national practice of over 40 years, doing work across the country. Over the last 40 years, we've done over 800 fiscal impact analysis studies. We also specialize in impact fee and cash proffers. We do a number of different economic impact analysis, real estate feasibility studies, and other revenue enhancement strategies. We have a wide range of Idaho experience, all the way up from the very top of the state down to the southeast corner. Just recently, we completed a fiscal impact tool for the city of Eagle, and I'm also presently completing a study, an impact fee study for the city of Idaho Falls. Excuse me. So our relationship with Compass has been going on for at least a couple years now. We completed a phase 1 fiscal impact analysis to help evaluate several growth scenarios in the Communities in Motion 2050 plan. That was an average cost approach, which included the cities, the counties, schools, and highway districts. We had about a month timeline, 6-month timeline there, and the results of that study were used in the Compass public outreach regarding the scenarios. Now, what we're presenting today is our phase 2 tool. This is a dynamic project level fiscal impact tool. Again, looking at the cities, counties, school districts, and highway districts, but individually. So you'll be able to see the fiscal impacts at each one of those levels. It was a 12-month timeline, which gave us the ability to apply some marginal cost approach to the project development plans. We had a much longer sort of data gathering period where we did sort of a road show going around to the different members to speak with their departments to understand their needs for accommodating future growth. There's a number of different uses for this fiscal impact tool. And just to name one, Compass will be including the results of this tool in their development checklist. So to go into fiscal impact 101, at the sort of high level overview, a fiscal impact analysis determines and estimates the cash flow to the public sector, answering the question, are revenues generated by new growth enough to cover the new services and facility demands to accommodate that growth? So we look at the estimated revenues, so that's taxes, fees, charges, one-time revenues like impact fees. Then we reduce that by the expenditures that would be necessary to accommodate that growth. That's being operating costs from your public safety and fire, road maintenance, schools, and then also the capital needs. So if there's need for new roadways or new fire stations, all of those costs are reduces the revenue, and at the end you'll get a net surplus or a net positive. So, to give a little bit further detail on how our fiscal impact tools work, at the very beginning, we defined land use profiles. These profiles have different demand factors like persons per housing unit, vehicle trips, public safety demands. And then we also define the development scenario that we're analyzing. Usually it's a 20 or 30-year growth period. Might be project level, but could go all the way up to regional development model that we did in phase 1. Then we want to define sort of the base year to understand the population and jobs, the existing demands on public services. We get a sort of demand base by applying those land use profiles and development to the base year data. Then that flows all into the budgets of the communities that we're analyzing. So again, we're looking at operating revenues and capital revenues, but also operating costs and capital costs. That flows into a budget summary, and then we put together those results in sort of tables in graphs that can be easily digestible. So, in general sense, a positive impact, positive fiscal impact, positive fiscal impact shows that the development supports the additional operation capital facilities needs to accommodate that growth, but also that positive impact provides a benefit to the community's other long-term goals. When there's a negative impact, the community may need to lower levels of service, increase revenues, or delay capital projects to help support that development. There are two general approaches to a fiscal impact analysis: an average and a marginal approach. Average is much simpler, more common, because the study takes a per capita and per job approach in those studies, while the marginal approach, when available, is generally recommended for a number of reasons. One being that there's a deeper analysis of the revenues and cost generators. For example, let's say take Parks and Rec, for example, your department head of Parks and Rec might not necessarily be directly impacted by growth, but your maintenance crews will, to accommodate the additional parks that were constructed to accommodate that growth. And through a marginal approach, you can capture that difference. Also, you can include geographic cost differentials. This is critically important in communities where there's certain areas that have existing infrastructure that can absorb future growth, while there are other areas of the city that new infrastructure would have to be put in place to accommodate that growth. Also, a marginal approach can include absorption techniques. An example of this would be demand thresholds, let's say for a new school or for a new fire station, that can be triggered at a certain demand level, better illustrating the timing of capital expenditures, and then consequently the operating costs attached to that new capital. So there's a list here of different types of developments in the recommended approach. Just to name a couple, the infill is recommended at a marginal approach, really to sort of drill down at the available capacity at that level in the community. And also, some older communities do see redevelopment projects that necessitate larger utility improvements, like water and sewer lines. If they have gone past their lifespan, larger capital infrastructure improvements might be necessary to accommodate a redevelopment project. Now, at sort of a small, medium scale, an average approach is recommended, because in some cases, a marginal approach might actually underestimate demand. Going back to sort of that threshold example for marginal approach, if a new maintenance crew is triggered at a certain demand level, but a smaller development doesn't reach that, you might not see a operating cost, say on Parks and Rec maintenance, at a marginal approach, yet that small to medium scale development still puts a demand on park infrastructure. And then at sort of your larger scales, your city and county-wide analysis, a marginal approach is recommended, because at that level you can create service areas, again, sort of addressing capacity in one area and capacity deficiencies in another. With that said, there are a number of other reasons why an average approach would be recommended. If the study has time constraints to it, if there's limited data or budget for this study, also if most of your services and facilities are at capacity, or an average approach is fine to use. So, an example here, in some cases, again, especially at that very small and very large scale scenarios, your marginal and average cost approach might actually get to near the same cumulative result. However, you lose detail in that average cost approach. This figure here, just hypothetical, that blue line is the average cost, sort of smooth impact that you generally see, while the marginal cost, the red line, you see the dips and spikes when new capital comes online and new one-time costs, one-time revenues are triggered by development. So, sort of getting back to general purposes of a fiscal impact tool, they help answer a number of different questions, including what is the relationship between development densities and infrastructure costs? What is the relationship between geographic locations and new development in the cost? Another example of this would be, specific to the Treasure Valley, the West Ada School District. Pretty well known that, they're building new schools, adding new seats to help with their capacity needs. So if development is happening in that area, a fiscal model would include the capital costs necessary to accommodate that, so that the extra seats triggered by the enrollment projected from the development. While, say, in Boise School District, if there's available seats in the area of a development, there's not going to be a capital cost associated with that development. There will be an ongoing operating cost for there's no students, but there won't be a capital cost. There's an economic development element to fiscal impact tools to help determine what's the return on government investment. Also, what is the impact of various developments? So if you want to look at retail development compared to office, compared to hotel or industrial, you can do that with fiscal impact tool. What is the optimum mix of land uses? So commercial compared to residential, what's the optimum mix there for a community? And a question that a lot of communities are trying to figure out today is, are we living off of tomorrow's growth? So, fiscal impact analysis, these tools are probably only being used in maybe 10% of communities in the country. And a lot of local governments don't know the true costs of development decisions, and also if their current land use plan is fiscally sustainable. Their fiscal studies are required in some cases, generally at the comprehensive plan level, but those studies really only concern the capital needs for that growth. And if you look at a community budget, generally it's about 20% of capital projects, while 80% is the ongoing growth, where these studies aren't capturing that. There's also lack of formal standards in this industry. There's a number of different methodologies, just to name a few that I brought forward a couple slides ago. Also, cumulative development impacts are not being tracked. So individual projects are sort of analyzed in a vacuum. Not many communities are looking retrospectively at the cumulative development that has happened and what that means fiscally into their budget. Also, a lot of these analysis don't address infrastructure replacement, nor do they reflect geographic differences. Now, it needs to be acknowledged that fiscal issues are only one concern. There are going to be developments that have a negative fiscal impact, but have an important interplay with the community quality of life. Good recent example is the cost of land use study that I just completed in La Plata County, Colorado, where the city of Durango is. And we found that restaurants had a negative fiscal impact to the city, yet they contribute to the tourism economy and the quality of life of the city. And that is an important element to consider when looking at restaurants or other development types like that. Also, there's a number of other issues, environmental, on the sort of the nature side of things, but also social environmental issues. Land use issues, housing affordability, which is certainly a growing issue here in the Treasure Valley, but nationwide, and also transportation issues. So multimodal initiatives, congestion issues need to be considered, not just the fiscal results of the development. So the next portion here, I wanted to compare fiscal impact studies to other budget or impact studies. The first being fiscal versus economic studies. So an economic impact analysis really reflects the overall economy of the community. It looks at ongoing and one-time impact. So for residential, that's the construction of those new homes at one-time impact, but then also the ongoing consumer spending of that household. On the non-residential side, again, this is construction of, say, a new office building, but then the job creation from that and the spending of the jobs that's created at that, say, that new office building. However, these economic impacts don't follow jurisdictional lines. In a lot of cases, it flows out of the jurisdiction, sometimes the region, and even sometimes the state. Going back even to this La Plata County example, if you've ever been to Durango, you know how geographically isolated that county is. So during our analysis, which included an impact, economic impact component, it was easy to assume that all of the economic or most of the economic output would be captured within the La Plata County because it's miles and miles away from any other commercial hub. But that it would be very hard to do in the Treasure Valley to isolate economic impacts just in one community. If there was a new, say, manufacturing plant in Cuna, it would be hard to make the assumption that all of those households and jobs and spending would happen in Cuna because of the interworkings of the Treasure Valley. Also, what we do see quite a bit is economic impacts blending into the fiscal results, overstating the positive impact, and that's presented to community leaders. Also, specifically to Idaho, you're not collecting point of sale sales tax, so a lot of that additional spending from households and jobs really isn't captured at the city level. Now, another comparison is a fiscal impact analysis to budget forecasting or municipal budget practices. Those municipal budgeting processes are generally revenue driven. So you look retrospectively to historical data to find trends in your revenue, to forecast the coming year, and then setting that equal to setting your expenditures equal to that, which generally means shifting around revenues from one department to another, or addressing capital needs or delaying some needs. While a fiscal impact analysis isn't revenue constrained, so we look at costs and revenues separately. So when you put in a development scenario, we assume that the current levels of service will continue into the future. So your number of police officers per 1,000 residents is going to stay the same through the 20-year projection period. Your number of park acres per capita is going to stay the same, and there's going to be a cost associated with that. On the revenue side, there will be property tax and other fees that are generated from this project, and then we compare the two, and that's where you get a net deficit or a net surplus. Now, lastly, what we've been seeing is sort of an increasing trend of market analysis being necessary for a fiscal impact study. These are, incredibly important when available because it helps provide reality to these studies in context of what the local market can support. If that's single family homes at a certain value, or are we looking at larger densities with mixed use developments, multifamily developments, or large scale retail? Is that even possible in a community compared to office, compared to industrial? Now, in the cases when market analyses aren't available, fiscal models can still be operated, and they play an even more important role because you can do some sensitivity testing and what if scenarios to help understand where a fiscal impact would stand based on different market variables. Now, how is fiscal impact analysis used in planning? These studies are helpful in evaluating project level developments, also individual rezoning applications in the pursuit of being fiscally sustainable and overall being sustainable, your triple bottom line. These play a critical role in your comprehensive planning process and rezoning validations. Also, if there's an annexation, helps determine if bringing in that development will be fiscally beneficial to the city. And truly answering the question, is growth paying for itself? On the economic development side, if we're seeing certain developments bring in a high positive impact, that could lead to discussion if development should be incentivized, and if so, how much the city should incentivize those developments. Now, also there's capital planning involved into these fiscal impact tools to help understand certain improvements and how they should be programmed, but also the replacement of those improvements. Community can help analyze and examine the cases where state and federal funding is actually decreasing. What does that mean for future growth in the city's future budget? If you're seeing level of services change, so if there's an initiative to increase the level of service for, say, police officers, or there's been a gradual decrease of park acres or fire stations, these fiscal tools can help really determine what that means financially for the city. And also there's demographic shifts. So we're seeing household sizes decrease. If there's been multimodal initiatives to bring down vehicle trip generation rates, these tools can help a city determine what those impacts might look like. So just some takeaways for the Treasure Valley and Idaho, sort of a budget structure angle. If you don't know, property tax is the revenue driver for taxing districts and cities and counties here. However, that's limited. So there's that 3% cap for annual increases, homeowners exemption, which allows homeowners to reduce their assessed value that is then taxed. Also, what we were hearing from many communities is that referendums and supermajorities, those limitations are hindering operating and capital budgets. And then to throw a wrench into all of this, what the recently signed House Bill 389 put even more limitations on property tax. In a couple of slides, I will address that specifically. Now, again, what I mentioned prior, sales tax isn't captured at point of sale in Idaho. It actually is distributed to the state, and they appropriate it. And a pretty complicated calculation. A portion of it is fixed, and then a portion of it is actually based on population. So your retail development in a city really isn't contributing to sales tax revenue. It's actually residential development that is helping boost sales tax at the city level. There's certainly pros and cons to this. When there's not point of sales tax, the cons would be that retail development does generate a high level of public safety and transportation demands. So when there's not that point of sales tax, those developments generally don't pay for themselves. And also in some cases, if a community does receive point of sales tax, its budget can be supported by a large attractor like a IKEA or luxury shopping mall. And we see this happen quite a bit in the Denver metro area. Now, pros for having this budget structure in states like Arizona and Colorado, there really is a race to the bottom to incentivize retail development. Communities worry about cannibalization of their retail economy. And also sales tax fluctuates quite a bit more than property tax. So you'll see more swings on the revenue side if a community is more reliant on sales tax and property tax. Furthermore, there's one-time revenues in some communities that are supporting ongoing costs. That's creating a reliance on annual growth. You're not getting ongoing revenues like property tax. It's not at a level that can support ongoing costs. Impact fees are limited in the state of Idaho. There's only a handful of infrastructure categories that can be used, impact fees can be collected for. General government those infrastructure categories can't be used, and also school construction. Impact fees can't be used for school construction. A big ticket item for a lot of communities here, which does place an extra burden on the current tax base to help construct that new facility or new school that is triggered by new development. There are barriers at the state level and at the voter level in establishing new revenues. And lastly, in this sort of boom of housing growth in the Treasure Valley, there really is a tightrope balancing act happening at the policy level that the leaders are walking right now. So specifically to the House Bill 389, there are a number of different changes and additions to what municipal governments can collect in property tax. It's a pretty lengthy document if you haven't looked at it. Myself, and then also through Association of Idaho Cities, they provided a paraphrasing as well. So just to touch on a few sort of more pertinent elements, levies for new construction in annexations have been restricted to 90%. So the city could generally bring in 100% or the total value of new construction into their tax base to assess property tax. Now that's been reduced by 10%. Only 90% of new construction can be brought in. This was a last minute change, but we included it in the fiscal impact tool, and it can be adjusted if this number changes. You will obviously see decreases in revenue when this with this new addition. Property tax has been limited and it cannot exceed 8%. So that's that 3% annual increase, but then also new construction as well. And on top of that, a couple other components to property tax. Really, this is more a policy decision that needs to happen, and how a community is going to react to that. And that feeds into the tool's annual update. Foregone levy authority may be included in future budgets by an adjusted process. So right now, only 1% of foregone taxes can be brought in for maintenance and operations. 3% can be brought in for capital projects, but that's only one time. Once that capital project is constructed, the city or taxing district loses that 3%. Again, this is more of a policy decision of how the community wants to adjust their budgets to address this, and then that feeds into this fiscal impact tool. A couple other items to mention: the homeowner's exemption was increased to $125,000, used to be $100,000, further reducing what communities can collect in property tax. This is easily adjustable in the tool, so if this increases or decreases throughout the years, we'll be able to update that easily. Also, there's been adjustments to urban renewal districts. Again, a policy decision that will be fed into the tool's annual update. So I'm going to pause here, and if there's been any questions, Amy, feel free to bring those about.
Great, thank you, Colin. Just as a reminder, if you do have questions, to please enter them in the chat, and I will provide them to Colin now and at the end of the presentation. Also a reminder, if you've not already, to please complete the poll on your screen. It helps Compass know how well we are doing at reaching out to everyone across the valley. But then to get into questions, first question is, Eagle recently decided to scrap plans for a park on Floating Feather and sell the land to a developer to build homes on site instead. Is this an example of new home building being undertaken to help support ongoing fiscal needs?
Could you say that again? Sorry, I could or speak up a little bit.
Sorry. Eagle recently decided to scrap plans for a park on Floating Feather and sell the land to a developer to build homes on site instead. Is this an example of new home building being undertaken to help support ongoing fiscal needs?
That's a policy decision. I wouldn't say it's not, it would be necessarily a strategy of new growth, community needing new growth to support ongoing costs. I'm sure there were a number of different reasons that the city of Eagle decided to do that. Maybe they got other land in lieu of this land to put a park. They might have other park plans where this land didn't fall into. So with the purchase of that property, they can now make improvements on other land to better suit their population.
Next question is, we have many small, very small towns, especially in Western Canyon County, where a very small amount of growth could have a big impact. Is the tool able to account for that, or for something that would be not even maybe a blip on the radar in some of our larger communities? How that would impact a very small community? Does the tool measure that?
That's a good question. So we include, and I even visited Notice, Parma, Greenleaf, and Wilder actually during our road show. And to an extent, yes, there are, especially on the road side of things and the capital side of things, we're looking at funded plans to determine the fiscal impact of development. So if there's not, a road improvement in a plan, that might be necessitated for a future development because it wasn't on anyone's radar. It won't be picked up right now, but we do this annual update, so we'll address those capital needs. And even if that project was constructed in that window of time, we will pick that up to do more of a cost recovery. We'll attribute some of that cost to that growth.
And last question, at least for now. You mentioned that the plan or the fiscal impact tool could be used to help kind of see how growth impacts other communities. For instance, use the example of if there was a new development in Kuna or a new manufacturing plant in Kuna, there would be impacts in the other communities around there. Given that you developed this for Compass, so specifically for Ada and Canyon counties, could it be used to determine the impact in Ada and Canyon counties on projects elsewhere, such as a large project in Omar County or in Gem County?
To an extent, where the tool could capture that, say if there's a large employment center were to open up outside of the Treasure Valley in another county, you might see residential development uptick within the Treasure Valley, and so we'll be able to capture that. But only to an extent, sort of the spillover effect on the economic side isn't captured here.
Okay, thank you, Colin. That is all the questions that we have at the moment, so I will turn it back over to you. Just as a reminder, if you have additional questions, to please put them in the chat and I will provide them to Colin at the end of his presentation. Also, please do remember to fill out the poll if you haven't already, to help us track how well we are doing to reaching out to everyone in the community. Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Colin.
Great, thanks, Amy. So what we want to address now is the fiscal impact tool, or FIT, that we produced and put together with and for Compass. So Again, this tool is a project level analysis of developments in its impacts on the community bottom line. So you're going to see impacts for the city, for the county, for the highway district, and for the school district. We pre-programmed a number of different land uses in the budgets into this tool, but that's going to be annually updated with help of Digital Advise and Compass staff. We were given a 12-month window for this project, so it really allowed us much more detail and sophistication and applied marginal cost approach to a lot of these budgets and a lot of the capital needs, much more detailed than what we put together in the first phase. So this tool is in Microsoft Excel. We include some Visual Basic macros in there. If you have any experience, if a user has any experience, decent amount of experience with Excel, they will be able to navigate this tool pretty easily. It makes it, the macros make it very powerful and flexible. We also have the ability to include other modules into the tool at a later date. So if we want to include an economic element to this, that can be done through this tool here. It also, being Excel and using Visual Basic, really provides transparency to the tool. There really isn't a black box concern here. You can see all of the data, all the assumptions. You can even flow through the calculations and algorithms to truly understand how these calculations are being made. So getting into the building blocks of the tool, the first step was our data gathering and interview stage. During this process, which was done in the fall of last year, we met with over 40 communities, sat down with highway districts and public works departments, parks departments, the public safety side, really to understand these departments' operations in their budgets. We wanted to understand how they were seeing growth, certain trends in demographics. We also needed to understand, on the ground, what were plans that were in place or sort of coming online to accommodate the growth. We wanted to understand the partnership and cross-jurisdiction efforts happening. And 2020 was a wild year, so we needed to understand the COVID impacts as well. A summary of that, to no one's surprise, most areas of the Treasure Valley are growing, but that type of growth varies. So in some communities, you're seeing actually areas densifying, while in other communities, you're seeing large lot development. This is sort of infill versus the greenfield growth patterns. You're also seeing demographics and services varying. So your starter homes are popping up in certain areas of the valley that have larger household sizes, so producing more people and more demand on facilities and services. While in other parts of the region, it's more of an empty nester development with less folks, but and less demand. Also, what we were sort of hearing was that higher valued homes were having smaller households, and I'll get to a little bit more about that in a couple slides. Now, another point was that some areas of the Treasure Valley, especially on this Boise side, are reaching build out, and that influences what new infrastructure is needed. In a lot of cases, the existing infrastructure, let's say roads, but also say fire stations, those that are in place today can really absorb all of the infill and redevelopment growth that's going to happen. So you're not going to see capital projects triggered in those areas that are reaching build out. We also saw a variety of budget structures and services being provided at the city level, at the county level, school district, and highway district. And that really has a strong relationship to the fiscal impacts of this tool. Questions like, are one-time revenue sources supporting ongoing operations? We needed to uncover that. Also asking, will current staff be able to handle a 20% increase in population? So not just your capital facilities, but also your FTE, especially the more public-facing services and departments. What you're providing today, are you able to absorb that? Are you going to need to hire one new employee or 20 new employees to support this new growth? So after we did that, we started constructing those land use profiles and those demand factors within that. There are up to 12 housing types for each city, each district. And each one of those housing types has 4 or 5 value thresholds. So we're looking at single family homes from 3,000 to 4,000, 400,000, then 400,000 to 500,000. And it really will help understand the demands from those different housing types, because what we were seeing in the valley is that does change based on values. We also included 18 non-residential types, again, getting to the point where you could run what if scenarios in determining, what does a big box retail look like? What if this open area were to develop into hotel or manufacturing? What are the fiscal impacts to the city? And we're not trying to capture 100% of the growth, because there's going to be sort of one-off developments, say a minor league baseball stadium that we're not constructing and pre-programming into the tool here. Really, we're trying to capture and get a good proxy for at least 95% of future development. Different demand factors are programmed for each one of these land use types. So on the residential side, those are housing sizes or persons per housing unit, the number of students per housing unit, vehicle trips and VMT, your police calls and fire and EMS calls per unit. On the non-residential side, we're looking at employees per 1,000 square feet, your vehicle trips per 1,000 square feet, and then public safety call rates. So again, a theme that we were seeing was that, I was hearing this from the east part of the valley to the west part of the valley, from the north to the south, was that actually as homes were increasing in value, your persons per housing unit were decreasing. And with local US PUMS data, public use micro data, we actually were able to confirm that. So we saw with every increase of $100,000, and this is on average, every increase of $100,000 in a single family home, the household size decreased by 0.2 persons. And that might not look like a lot, but that's about anywhere from a 5 to 10% decrease in persons, which generally speaking would be a 5 to 10% decrease in services that were necessary to accommodate that home. On the multifamily side, we even saw a higher decrease. So every $100,000 increase in value for multifamily development, there was a decrease of 0.3%, 0.3 persons, which is a much higher percentage decrease, and then there'll be consequential impacts to services. So just to drill down and give an even further example of demand factors and why they are critically important, they really help quantify certain demands on services. So, best case scenario, you have all of the demand factors necessary that are directly correlated to that service. Now, there's going to be times where that data is not available, but there's going to be, in some cases, good proxies that can be used that still help capture accurately the demand on services. While if you use other demand factors, in some cases, it skews the results. So during this construction of the fiscal impact tool, we were able to get really good police call data from the city of Boise, and it broke down the annual call rate or total number of calls to each development type. So you're seeing a figure here that has single family, multifamily, retail, office, and industrial. So they said X amount of calls last year went to single family development. We know how many single family homes there are. So then we were able to capture the average number of calls per year by a single family home. So really the second column, police calls, really is the directly correlated demand, truly capturing what the police services necessary to support these development types. And it really follows suit with what we see nationally, with industrial being the lowest, just based on sort of the scale of industrial development, single family being second lowest, multifamily and office being sort of in the middle, and then retail actually generating the highest, and to an extent 3 or 4 times the amount of police calls per 1,000 square feet compared to other development types. Now there's a good proxy for public safety development, that being vehicle trips. So it helps. Vehicle trips sort of is an estimation. Vehicle trip generation, I should say, is an estimation really of sort of the economic activity happening at that site. And you can see, even just with the red, that in relative terms, if you were to use vehicle trips, you're still sort of capturing a little bit more accurately the demand on police services. Things get a little bit skewed where you're seeing actually single family and multifamily switch there based on vehicle trips. Now, in the last example for population to jobs, if you were to take an average cost approach and say, we're just looking at population and jobs for our public safety demands on our police. What you would end up getting is office actually having the highest demand, and then industrial being the lowest, but your retail, which had a disproportionate amount in reality of calls, somewhat being in the middle. So this level of detail that we were able to capture with help of the communities here really drove home the accuracy and precision of this tool. Now, another element to a fiscal impact tool and to this this model are the service areas, right? Capital needs in certain areas. And overall, that actually got us to 136 different service areas for this tool. This is also a product of the 4 layers of government that we're analyzing. I always found it interesting that us in Idaho, we really don't like government, but we have a lot of them. And so it has added the intricacy of this tool that you generally don't see in other states. So, just to define a service area, each one of these service areas, so there's 136 of them, has a unique combination of service demands. So there's levels, the demand factors that come from that, capital needs. So geographically, there's, say, capital road projects in one area that differ from capital road projects in another area, and then land use profiles, so different developments, single family compared to multifamily, different multifamily stratified. All of that sort of is one service area. So you're going to see here sort of an overwhelming map, but broken down, Ada County and Canyon County, all of those different service areas, and the intricacies that we're using for this tool. So just to sort of drill down on an example, so if we look at the city of Boise, we have 6 service areas for the city, but then if you look at that Boise Bench area, that actually there's even 2 more service areas within that one Boise service area, because the school district boundary falls through that. So getting to the budget side of this analysis, budgets are used to really help, again, quantify in dollars what this demand means on operating and capital demands. So during this process, we put together these budget memos and presented it to each one of the members that we we sat down with that included revenue assumptions, operating cost assumptions, and those capital facility needs. So on the revenue side, we're including general and special revenue funds, capital funds, and then taking a deeper dive when possible, separating out actual budget line items to really sort of drill down into the details here. Now, one thing we haven't included in this fiscal impact tool are enterprise funds. Enterprise funds, say a utility like a wastewater district or department, really operates more like a business than a tax-supported department. They set their rates and fees to at a level that offsets all of their ongoing costs, but then also their capital costs. So excluding them from the tool really helps sort of clear out the muddy water if we were to include these funds, because at the end of the day, they would break even with the revenues that they have in place. So just to give you a sense of sort of what this looks like, here's a property tax, the franchise fees, and just this is a screenshot of the tool and the different budget line items that we've included. We've determined some of these being impacted by growth, others aren't impacted by growth, and then which demand factor we're using to determine the projected revenues in this case. On the operating cost side, same thing as then we're looking at general fund and special revenue funds, those that are tax supported, not including the enterprise funds. And then also when possible, when data is available to separate out department personnel and the other operating costs, that is done. So here's another just screenshot of the tool where we've broken down the departments, determine if that department was impacted by growth. And then if so, breaking out the personnel and other operating costs, some of the personnel may be impacted by growth and some of the other operating, but we're able to decipher that here. And then again, what demand factor are we using to project those costs? Capital side, we go through the capital plans, went through all of our notes, through the interview process to really break down what projects would be benefiting a more citywide development plan, while other projects that are really benefiting a more localized area. This is just an example here. You can see Parks and Rec, some of the parks being regional projects that are benefiting everyone in the city, while some other park projects are only providing benefit to the service area that they are within. So getting into a little bit of the workflow of the tool, a lot of this I've already addressed, but ultimately the user is going to go back to that map and find a locator key. So there's a little code that each service area has. They plug that little code into the tool, and the tool pre-fills and activates that specific service area and the different demographics and capital needs and demand factors for each land use for that specific area. Through that process, we're truly looking at local specific costs and revenues. The user is also going to include three things: any residential development, so housing units, the absorption of that over 20 years, non-residential units, so if the floor area, say retail development of 100,000 square feet, and then assessed values. So that's inputted into the model, and then again using this Excel format and Visual Basic macros, the user can navigate through the tool. There's just a 2-page workflow to get from the very beginning to the results. So, just driving home the point here, here's the map again. You can see, say if we're just looking at CUNA, there's K1 there, but also you have different demand factors for K5 and K2. Here's an example of the different demographic and land use demand factors and capital needs. So if we're just looking at the Boise North service area as an example, here's a single family detached home broken down into those value thresholds, and the persons per housing unit decreasing as the value increases, your students per housing unit, VMT, vehicles miles traveled, to determine the impacts on roads and transportation facilities, your law enforcement calls per unit, and fire and EMS calls per unit. So here again is some screenshots of the further detail of the budgets we've included into the tool. So again, you're seeing taxes, license and permits, intergovernmental revenues as a revenue category. Then we further break that down to get specific with each budget line item. And so you can see a lot of these being determined that they're impacted by growth. Some of them aren't impacted by growth. Those that are, how much is impacted, what is the demand factor that we're using. And you can see a handful here saying direct entry. So those are the building permits that the city is charging new development. And each building permit schedule is different at each locality. So we're actually doing a calculation on a separate tab specific to the service area that's included here. So it's not a sort of average cost approach. The user, again, is going to be inputting the residential and non-residential development, just in the yellow here. Far left is the assessed values. They're just going to put an absorption over 20 years on the right in the yellow. Also, you can see the homeowner's exemption on the bottom right, and adjustments there. Also, if the development is in a TIF, that can be identified as well. So really, the user, once they're into the tool, they go to hit number one, this arrow here that brings them to the web-based locator map, that map we were just looking at. They identify which locator key it is, this one being K1 in CUNA. Then they hit that third button. That brings them to the development input page. They put it into this development scenario, and then they hit 5, and that brings them to the results. So examples of that, and again, these are all hypothetical examples that I just wanted to highlight variations in results. So what we're seeing here is a hypothetical example of 20,000 square feet of a grocery store being developed in year 1, and then in year 4, 50 multifamily developments come online. So the results can be broken down annually. So you can see the annual results, and then the net. So you'll get a cumulative, rolling cumulative up to the 20 years. The tool will also highlight the break-even period. So in this case, just within the first year, the city of CUNA is able to break even in this development. Ada County actually isn't breaking even through the 20 years. VRT breaks even in the 3rd year, and then overall for the community at large, it breaks even in the 1st year. So here's a sort of visualization of just those results. So you can see the spike in revenue, the green, in the 1st year for the construction of the grocery store. In year 4, you're seeing another spike for those multifamily homes. Again, there's those impact fees and other one-time building permit fees that you're seeing a spike. Below that, so this is just city facilities. Below that, you're seeing the ongoing costs in the red, and then in the dotted red are the capital costs. So say, I believe it's probably parks and maybe fire for the city of CUNA and the fire district there that are necessary to accommodate that growth. Now, the purple line is the cumulative impact, the net rolling cumulative impact, and it's ever increasing after the development comes online. And you can see that, and the green line, the revenue being above the operating costs, so it identifies that this development, hypothetical development, is able able to offset all of its ongoing costs and into the future be a net surplus to the city. So I wanted to, in a couple examples here, show sort of what that means, this development, what that means in different communities. So again, the hypothetical example, randomly selected service areas just to see what the differences are. So you're seeing CUNA Central, CUNA breaking even year one, Ada County not breaking even, and then most of the other communities breaking even there. Now, if this development, hypothetical development happened in the southern part of Meridian, you're seeing City Meridian breaking even, Ada County not, the West Ada School District actually being able to break even here. However, ACHD, Ada County Highway District, doesn't break even. In this case, VRT, or Valley Rapid Transit, or sorry, Valley Regional Transit, doesn't break even. And overall, it takes 16 years for this development to break even as a whole for the whole region. Now, if we go to Canyon County, Napa, the southern service area of Napa, it takes 4 years for this development to break even in Napa. Most other districts are able to break even except for VRT. And then in year 2, this is able to break even. If this development type is to be constructed in Caldwell, the west part of Caldwell, you can see all districts except for VRT break even in the first year. So just trying to drive home the point that these developments change, the results change for each development based on its geography and based on the community that it's in. So if we're just looking at, say, a subdivision of 200 homes, single family homes that's developed over 4 years, if that were to happen in the Boise Bench area, the city rate could break even in the first year. Ada County breaks even in the third year. The school district is able to break even in the first year. Then you're seeing ACHD and VRT actually not break even. And overall, this taking 4 years to come out ahead for the valley. If this development were to happen in Star, now you're seeing things change a little bit, because also there's different demand factors and different budgets happening here when it is occurring in Star. So the city is able to break even in the first year. Now, I believe probably your household sizes are larger in Star compared to the Boise Bench. So Ada County, it takes 7 years for this subdivision to break even. ACHD doesn't break even. VRT breaks even in 4 years. And then it takes 8 years overall for this development to come out ahead. Now, if we look at Eagle, this 200 unit development doesn't break even for the city of Eagle. Ada County breaks even in 4 years. ACHD doesn't break even. VRT doesn't break even. And you're able to break even after 10 years overall for this development. Now, let's just say that this development happens in unincorporated Ada County in the southeast part. We're not looking at city results because it's unincorporated. Ada County takes 7 years to break even. The Boise School District actually doesn't break even in this case. That might signal, I believe, maybe some capital costs, but maybe some larger student enrollment per household in this unincorporated area, bringing about further operating costs as well. Now, in this area of the county, ACHD breaks even in the 6 years. VRT doesn't break even, and then you have overall the development, the subdivision breaking even in 8 years. So not to drill down too much, but I wanted to just include, so we're still looking at the 200 unit development, but then we include some retail. So we include, a 100,000 square foot big box retailer that comes online after the 5th year. And, I don't want to sort of harp on this too much, but with the retail overall, there's a negative impact to the Boise Bench, but it's still mostly positive. There's an added negative impact to Ada County when the development's in Star. There's an added negative impact to Ada County when development's in Eagle. And then you're also seeing a added positive impact to Boise School District when this happens in unincorporated areas, because this additional big box retailer is generating property tax for the school district, but actually isn't generating any students. So although in some cases this retail development might be a net negative for some communities, when you look at the school district side, this is a positive. So lastly, I just wanted to explain a little bit how this tool is going to be used. So Compass will be housing the tool and incorporating the results into their development checklist. So this is a checklist that I can't speak too much about, but it indicates different issues that is then presented to the community leaders. This tool at the Compass will be doing those individual projects, but then also long-range growth scenarios for its members. So, we're really talking about project level developments, but say there's a big tract of land that a community is interested in understanding certain growth scenarios, if it goes commercial, if it goes multifamily, transit-oriented development, or traditional single-family homes, they would be able to run sort of what-if scenarios through Compass to understand what those fiscal impacts would be. Also, trained Compass member staffs will have access to a web interface of the fiscal impact tool that can be used for preliminary development discussions. City planners, once they go through the training, which we're starting later this month, they will have access to a toned down version of what you see, where they'll just put into the development plan. It'll be a web interface that feeds into the tool in the background, and then they get the results to sort of help support any preliminary development discussions. So with that, I'll open it back up to questions.
Great, thank you, Colin. We have a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to jump around a little bit to kind of lump some of them together. I have two related broadly to state highways. One, is there a jurisdictional impact that the tool shows for state highways or ITD? And similarly, you gave some sort of development examples of retail or residential. Can you do the same thing for a state highway, such as the State Highway 16 extension, and that's fiscal impact on the different communities?
Well, to answer the first question, no. We haven't included the state side of things because, again, that adds another layer of development, because another layer of analysis. We would have to include state revenues as well, which would be a whole other sort of model. But now on the developments off of that highway extension, we aren't looking at, again, cost for that extension because it's a state cost. We're just looking at local costs. But what you might see is actually, I would imagine ACHD has tailored the capital planning with this highway extension in mind. So it might help, this highway extension might help offset the capital demands on ACHD and its tax base. And then any resulting development from that expansion would be impacted by that element as well.
Next question, does the model address affordable housing?
To an extent, I guess, just to, back to one of the slides earlier, there are a number of different issues that policymakers need to address and include in their calculus when approving projects. In cases, I'm going to say every case, but I think generally affordable housing might not pencil out in a fiscal model if you're looking at lower levels of revenue generation. Just that side of the equation might result in less impact or maybe even a negative impact. However, not every development is going to pay for itself. A community really needs to understand the different surpluses and deficits that come from different development types to create that optimum mixture that allows them to be fiscally sustainable, but also address other policy issues, goals, and initiatives.
Next, how does this kind of model differ from TREDIS or other kind of economic impact models that are applied, for instance, to a transportation project?
Yeah, so I don't have too much experience with TREDIS, but in-plan is another one that we use. And again, on the economic side, you plug in, this construction project is $10 million. These tools, this sort of input-output economic tool, has a number of different factors included, much more of sort of a black box than this fiscal impact tool. And it will capture regional impacts. And when I say regional impacts, that might even be beyond the state lines, job creation at the one time, but then also job creation if, say, transportation opens up an area of greenfield development that will have spin off and spill into other jurisdictions that really that's not going to impact the bottom line for communities.
How does the fiscal impact tool view master plan communities when compared to one-off subdivisions?
Yeah. So that again, we were looking at the development examples I was giving really at sort of the project level. We're just looking at sort of 200 units here, 100,000 square feet here, but it can be used for master planning, but we'll have to have development scenarios. So it's not based on acres if you're sort of rezoning or including density. Now, if you sort of are upzoning to say, it's 2 units per acre, and now we're going to 10 units per acre, what you can quickly do is just do a little bit of math to understand what the change in housing units would be with that increased density. Then we put that into the tool to understand what the fiscal impacts would be for that zoning change.
In one of your examples, the break even for most cities was 1 year, while for the city of Nampa, it was 4 years. Can you explain some of the reasons why there was the difference in the break even point in that example?
Yeah, I can't drill down to it right now, but there's a slew of different reasons. There even just at the demographic level, maybe household sizes or vehicle trips are higher than in Napa than in the other communities that we're analyzing. Also, the city of Napa and City Caldwell, they actually maintain their own roads, which doesn't happen in Ada County. So they also have a higher level of service and more services that they have to provide compared to, say, the city of Kuna and Eagle. So there's a number of different factors that come into play in these results.
From a city standpoint, does the fiscal impact tool ever show commercial, retail, or other projects generating more positive financial impact than residential or multifamily for the city, given the assumption that operating costs are higher for commercial, retail, or other?
In some cases, I would say, I think, I can't speak fully to this, but if we think about commercial development, especially retail or office development that looks like the Village and Meridian, since you're not collecting retail sales tax from that development, yet you have large amount of public safety and a huge amount of transportation demand from that development. In a lot of cases here in Idaho, it won't pencil out. Now, with that being said, if it's Class A office space that has, it's a very high level of assessed value. These are office workers, and as we were seeing, office doesn't generate too much of the public safety demand. You're getting more trips on the road, but it's far less than retail. So there's going to be some commercial development, especially once you get into Class A development, that will pencil itself out. And when you compare it to retail, residential, it all depends. Your multifamily that are lower in value might not pencil compared to, your 1 acre lot, $1 million homes, which might be empty nesters that, so lower levels of demand, but a high level of property tax and other revenues.
And similarly, from a school district standpoint, does the model ever show residential or multifamily projects generating more positive fiscal impact than commercial, retail, or other for the school district, given that students are only derived from residential and multifamily?
So, on the commercial side, non-residential, that's always going to be a net surplus to the school district because you're not generating any schools with that discrete development. Now, really, I guess back to, just hypothetical, if you say, $1 million home, especially, and that's not out of the realm of reality, really, in parts of the Treasure Valley, $1 million home. And again, what we were seeing with the data is as the homes increased in value, you decreased in family sizes. So you're actually getting less students coming from more expensive homes. So again, we're in this place where revenues are increasing and demand is decreasing for some residential developments.
How do impact fees affect the model?
Yeah, good question. So we include, along with building permits, we've included the specific impact fee schedules for each one of the communities. So we're not sort of taking an average approach there. And we say, if it's $3,000 a home for an impact fee, that $3,000 is triggered once when the housing unit is triggered or inputted into the tool. Now it's a one-time cost, so you're going to see that spike in runtime revenue. So you're going to see the spike in revenue, but you also see consequently the spike in capital. So hopefully impact fees are calibrated in each community to offset their capital costs. That's how impact fees work. Now, as I was mentioning before, you are limited in Idaho to what you can collect impact fees on. You can collect impact fees for parks and public safety and transportation, but you can't for, let's say, general government facilities. You can't for schools. And the cost of schools, for example, is ever increasing. And that, and even to another point, there's difficulties to raise property tax to help offset that because of certain supermajority limitations at the school level, school district level, where impact fees could help fund that gap to, ensure growth is paying its fair share.
I have two questions here that deal a little bit more with how the tool will be used. I'll start with you, Colin, but Carl Miller from Compass, you may want to chime in as well. So there are similar questions, so I'm going to kind of lump them together. The first is, how will an individual developer or builder be able to use the tool to evaluate a potential property for a project and be able to know prior to application how a city might view the financial impact of the project? And then similarly, will the scenario results generated by this tool be used with regulatory agencies when making decisions about development approvals?
So I can go first, Carl. So what we're planning on doing is, we didn't illustrate this today because it's still sort of in a development phase, is a user interface where, let's say a city planner is able to go through the necessary training with myself and Compass, that we feel that they're able to operate the tool and understand the interworkings of all of this, calculus that's happening. When that is the case, a home builder or developer can go to that city planner and they can start understanding preliminarily what the fiscal impact results would be. I guess maybe on a policy side, yeah, go to Carl for that.
No, I think that was a good explanation. Really, that web-based interface enables anyone with the training to have access to it to run scenarios or potential or what ifs based on the tool, and so all the workings of the tool is available to them, but not the inner workings of it. So that way they can quickly and easily test out different things and look at, say a subdivision proposal comes through. Well, what if we actually added more multifamily, or what if we changed some single family to townhomes? How would that impact the fiscal impact? So from a pretty early phase of negotiation, planners and developers would be able to look at what are the ramifications of different scenarios and share that and start to make conceptual plans from there. Was there a second part to that, Amy, that we didn't cover?
Yes. How will the results generated be shared by regulatory agencies when making decisions about development approvals?
And Colin, maybe I'll jump in and share a little bit more about that development checklist that we currently have used for the last few years, really to support local decision making by providing additional information about the impacts of development on a variety of things that look at the goals of Communities in Motion 2050 or 2040, our current long-range transportation plan. So we'll provide information about, are there accessible jobs in the area, or how would this impact pathways or bicycle connections. This would be another feature for that. So that, again, looking at this is a critical piece, but just one piece of the overall story of how well that's shared. Through the development checklist, we'll be able to share on development proposals, the fiscal impact side of it, to indicate, what is the break-even point, or what organizations benefit or have detrimental financial returns based on proposals. So that's just one part of it. Again, as a community looks at maybe updating their comprehensive plan or a sub-area plan, they can also plug in, what if scenarios. What if we change zoning or land use category? What would be the financial impacts of that? And we didn't touch on it much, but also the demographic side of that. What if housing prices increase, decrease, different demographic markets are hit by the proposal? What would that do as well? So a lot of different applications for this, but you'll probably see regulatory authorities will probably see it most through the checklist.
So it's
Amy,
27. Go ahead, Colin.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wanted to, include at the end here the fact that this is, I try not to toot my own horn, but this is a pretty unique tool. We do fiscal impact analysis across the country, and we generally do it just for one community, say a city or a county. There's been a couple examples where a tool like this has been put together for a region, but really currently this is sort of groundbreaking, especially in Idaho, in a lot of ways nationwide. So please, whoever is still on, pass the news along to even your, neighborhood associations, all other groups. I think Compass is going to try and do some outreach just to sort of spread the good word.
We have 2 minutes. I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 last questions. We won't be able to get to all of our questions, so I'll ask for quick answers. But first, does the tool consider maintenance backlogs or annual unfunded maintenance deficits?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. No. So what we do, we assume that your current levels of service will stay the same. So especially on, say, road maintenance, we look at what a highway district or a city is providing today for the sense of new road maintenance and apply that. So if there are sort of rolling deferred maintenance programs. That's not being captured here. And we also don't want to sort of overstate growth impact. So if there's a number of different unfunded projects that might not come to light, we don't want to overstack the deck against development.
And last question, what is the prescription for a city when the tool computes that a project does not break even? What's a city to do?
Oh, well, so again, you know, fiscal results are just one of many decision tools for decision makers. There are going to be some that don't pencil. If it's helping to address another goal or initiative by the community, maybe it's a development that's approved that doesn't pencil, but it's a decision that's been made to address other needs. On the other side, if it doesn't pencil, the development and developer and the community could come together to address that. Is there a large capital infrastructure triggered that's really not being offset by the development, and maybe there's negotiations that can come to play to help offset and mitigate those costs.
Great, thank you. And it is exactly 10:30. So thank you, Colin. Thank you to everyone who participated today. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions. I think we had a great discussion here at the end. I will follow up with an email with an evaluation form if you wouldn't mind filling it out and sending it back to me. Those are incredibly helpful to us in planning our education series. We also are currently accepting public comment on Compass's draft updated participation plan. And I'll attach a link to that in the email as well. If you have the opportunity to review that and send your comments, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, finally, if you did not have the opportunity before, if you can please complete the poll on your screen that just tells us a little about you to help us know how well we are doing in reaching out to everyone in the Treasure Valley. Participation is voluntary and the results are completely anonymous. It just gives us a sense of who all we are reaching. Thank you again, Colin and Carl, and thank you to all of you. As a reminder, we will post both the slides and the video later on Compass's webpage and YouTube channel, so you will be able to go back and refer to those as well. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.